Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name is Jim Hustvedt, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to understand the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, music supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visuals. Hello listener, welcome to another episode of Sync Music Matters. In a moment I'm going to be chatting to Mac Quayle, the composer behind the current Netflix series Monster, the Ed Gein Story. It's a deliciously dark horror thriller with Charlie Hunnam and Laurie Metcalf. It's pretty dark. I have to watch in small increments because I essentially can't handle anything too heavy. I chat to Mac about his early days as a DJ in New York City and a remixer, and how the change in musical landscape, i.e. the death of physical sales, led him to working with Cliff Martinez and composing for film and TV. We go under the skin of his creative process for Monster and chat about his use of synths and love of unusual playing techniques. And Mac also reveals what his real name is, what Mac is short for. It's not what you think, and it's technically not his actual name. But anyway, you'll find out at the end. As ever, if you are a regular listener and you could spare 8.7 seconds just to rate and review the podcast on your preferred podcast platform, I would be very, very grateful. It just goes a long way to helping the show reach as many people as possible. And if you want to follow the show on Instagram, it's LARP_music, or just search Jim Hustvedt. All right, enough of that. Grab yourself a hobnob and a cup of tea. Let's chat to Mac. Mac Quayle is an Emmy-winning, Grammy and BAFTA-nominated composer. His distinctive musical soundscapes have left an indelible mark on acclaimed projects such as Mr. Robot, for which he won a Primetime Emmy, American Horror Story, and Leave the World Behind. Recent projects include Netflix's Monster, the Ed Gein Story, and Mac is currently working on Season 2 of Apple TV's Dark Matter. As a producer, remixer and keyboardist, Mac has worked on over 300 commercial music releases and earned a Grammy nomination for producing Donna Summer's I Will Go With You. He has created music for some of the biggest names in the music business, including Madonna, Whitney Houston, Beyonce, Depeche Mode and Sting, to name but a few. Mac cites playing ping pong with Peter Gabriel at Real World Studios as one of his career highlights. Mac, thanks very much for joining me.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Did you win?
Oh, it was actually, I was too kind of starstruck, and I just was off my game, sadly, but it was fun. Okay.
Because I did read in the bio that you enjoy playing ping pong, so I assume you're pretty good.
I mean, I was just not that day.
No, okay. I suppose, yeah, it's Peter Gabriel. You probably, at his studio as well, you probably want to let him win.
Well, I mean, some of the details actually were that I never knew you could play doubles at ping pong, and that's how we played, and it was my first time, and so it was just a mess, basically.
We have a table tennis here in the studio, and unfortunately everyone else has sort of played so much that they've surpassed the level where I can even compete. So yeah, but it's always good fun. It's quite nice after making music to play table tennis, because it changes your focus a little bit.
It is a popular studio activity if you have the room for it.
It surely is. So I'd like to start, as ever, if you could cast your mind back to a young Mac Quayle growing up on the mean streets of Norfolk, Virginia. If someone had asked you, what would you like to be when you grow up, what would you have replied?
Wow. Gosh. I don't really remember having any sort of particular aspiration of what I was just sort of a kid floating free. I was starting to do music, but I wasn't thinking about it as a future.
There's no a rock star is one that comes up quite a bit, or paleontologists. Strangely, quite a few people have said paleontologists, and also fighter pilots.
Yeah, no, it was very ambiguous. I didn't have any concrete ideas.
And at what point, you said you started playing music? How did you start playing music?
I was basically put into the church choir by my parents at age 6. That was my very first musical experience, and that went well. And it, later piano lessons, and then high school band and orchestra as a percussionist, and then some rock bands. and then I made it into NYU college in New York, and ended up working in the music business in New York.
So did the music business and the sort of pop commercial writing come before TV and film?
It did. That was what I consider my first career, was doing that, and it all just kind of just happened. I mean, it was not something I really planned or prepared for, but through my use of technology, I was very into synthesizers and computers, and I got hired by dance and pop producers to work with them on music, and that was my early career in New York, and I just ran with it, and it turned out pretty good.
So that's finishing college. You're in New York. Did you have access to a studio and people come in there, or were you working in somebody else's studio?
Yeah, I was an intern at a recording studio in Manhattan, and it very quickly turned into a job, and I had access to synthesizers and all this equipment that I'd been, reading about in magazines and wanting to get my hands on. And and that was really the beginning. What
was the studio? Is it still?
It's not around anymore. It was called D&D Recording, and they were a small studio that wasn't really on the map. And then after I had left and my career was up and running, they became a bit famous as a hip hop studio. A lot of hip hop was recorded there. But no, they're not around anymore.
So, and you say you were doing primarily sort of electronic music?
Doing dance music, a lot of dance remixing. Those artists that you listed from my bio, those were all dance remixes. So
presumably you're getting the sort of a cappella vocals and the different multi-tracks for all the instruments, and then you're doing, it was like a sort of techno-electronic remix?
Yeah, I mean, it was stylistically based on the DJs that I was partnering with to do these remixes, and a lot of it was house music, so sort of a different flavors of house.
So did the DJs specify, okay, this is the kind of vibe I want, or is it if you're working for a particular DJ, it has to have a certain feel?
I mean, they would specify, and initially they would hire me to execute their vision, but then as our relationship evolved, it started to be more of a collaboration, and I had some partnerships with people, and we would go in, and now instead of just their name on it, there was the two of us as a duo, and I had a lot of input into what was happening. And I would do other ones on my own. And I even sort of dabbled for a few years as a DJ. It wasn't really for me. I really appreciate dance music and the culture, and it's been fascinating to watch it explode all over the world since then, but it wasn't for me to be a DJ.
What was it that you didn't like?
I mean, I think that it just, in those days, the gigs that I was doing, I'd have to do a set that was like 4 hours long. It's quite long, and it would start at maybe 11 or midnight and go till 4 or 5 in the morning, and at a certain point, by 3 a.m., I'm thinking, like, please, can we just turn off the music? It's just too loud. I don't want to do, and like, that's not, yeah.
DJ turning the music down. Yeah. There's antithesis of a DJ, isn't it? It's like, guys, I'm just going to turn it down for a bit. Can you just take 5?
No, it doesn't. But at the same time, all those years of making dance music and a little bit of DJing and spending a lot of time in clubs, I became quite fond of it. and I still have an appreciation for it, even though I'm not really involved in that at all anymore.
So at what point did the dance music, dabbling with DJing, then what was your introduction to music for TV and film?
Around 1999, 2000, the music industry, certainly in the US, probably globally, for the first time had a downturn. Like after its entire history had been nothing but growth. And now sales went down. And this was due to Napster and file sharing and CD copying and all these things. And so I was being hired by major record labels to do all this work. And that was the first sign that things were really going to shift. And I kept working for the next couple of years, and then all of a sudden it was like someone flipped a switch. All the budgets went away, and now I'm like, okay, now what? The industry just completely shifted, and I think we're talking like 2003 at this point. And I'd been in New York for a couple of decades, and I was itching to do something else. And so I decided to move to Los Angeles with a vague idea of maybe getting into scoring. I wasn't totally sure, but I moved out here, and I started sniffing around, and I eventually landed, some work, composing.
What was the first gig that you got?
The very first gig was an indie film, and I'm not proud to say that I did a terrible job on it. And it was terrible. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was, they weren't paying very much money. I still had this attitude of coming from the music business, and I needed to be paid a certain amount. It was terrible. And I remember not even having a great attitude with the people that I was working with. But a year or so later, I ran into the director somewhere, and I made an amends. I just want to apologize. Like, I just did not do a great job on your film. But then the first real, that was kind of, no one ever saw the film or heard of it. But the first real thing was that I got asked to work as an additional composer on a television show called Cold Case. And this was in 2006. And the composer was Michael Levine. And being an additional composer means that you help the main composer get the job done by collaborating with them on some of the music. And so that was really my introduction. And it couldn't have been more perfect situation for me. Michael really appreciated my sensibility. The workload that I was responsible for wasn't that much. All of the actual pressure and responsibility for the show was on his shoulders. And so it was just a great learning experience. And I worked on it for 4 seasons with him. And I kind of came out of that having a skill that I didn't have prior.
What were your main takeaways from that working experience?
I was starting to get a sense of how to write and produce music to help tell a story that's on the screen. I was learning how to work for someone else and to execute their vision, but also bring my own artistry into it. About halfway into that period, I met Cliff Martinez, a fantastic film composer, and I started working with him as well. And I worked with him for about 8 years. I did maybe 12 films with him. And it was a similar, the similar things that I was learning about how to help tell a story with music, how to work for someone else and be in their world. I was in like the Cliff Martinez sound, and how I could, express a little bit of Mac Quayle in that. And it was really rewarding and educational, and I got to work on some great projects.
And what sort of score was it? Orchestral score? Because obviously up to the point where you move to LA, you've been working primarily with dance music, but I see you've got guitars and that's some synths, modular synths as well. What sort of score was it, and at what point did you start to bring in different instruments? Presumably you'd always played those instruments, had a guitar and bass.
Well, I was using my electronic music skills. I mean, that's what I used on Cold Case with Michael. And Cliff Martinez has a very electronic sound. He does use orchestral elements depending on the score, and other things. So it was a very natural progression for me to take my budding skills as an electronic music producer, to take that and now apply it to composing and producing music for film and television. And most of it was electronic. Sometimes it sounded very electronic. Other times it was trying to imitate real instruments. But then I did start to evolve and start to use other things. So it wasn't just in my computer. I would record guitar and bass, and I would record the piano, and I would record other things. And eventually that led me to, writing orchestral and recording, real ensembles of players.
Is that something that you'd studied at college, or was it more music production that you'd been studying?
I did not study anything orchestral at college. There was some recording, some music theory, and I have mixed feelings about sharing this, but it's like I ended up dropping out. I did 2 years in college, and I wasn't that happy with the program at NYU. And this internship that I mentioned before came up, and it was quickly turning into a job. And so I just sort of took a leap of faith and didn't go back to college for the third year. And so I think it would have been nice to finish and have the degree, but at the same time, part of me wears it as a badge of honor. Like, I dropped out and I've managed to do okay.
Some of the greats, Steve Jobs, he dropped out, didn't he?
So I'll probably always be conflicted about it. Like I wish I had studied more. I don't have a very large foundation of classical training, some, but not huge. So no, I'd never studied orchestration or writing any type of orchestral music. And it was just, I learned from people that I worked for, and I learned by imitating things that I heard. And I learned by the fact that the technology had evolved so much. The sounds that you could create were, and still are, just incredible with your computers, that I was kind of learning by using samples and experimenting and doing things.
So learning on the job rather than learning the intellectual side of it. It's funny because I think it was Cristobal Tapia de Veer. He was saying that he's generally more drawn to scores that are done by people who aren't classically trained, and that's obviously nothing against people who are classically trained, but he thinks there's a different approach. And Jeff Russo, I think, was very much like you. He didn't study film composition or classical music, came very much through sort of commercial route, and think Johnny Greenwood, Trent Reznor. I think they're all, they do amazing work, but they haven't had that formal education. It just means that you have a slightly different perspective, which I think is probably, it can be a really good thing.
I can agree with that. And I think all those very talented people you listed are good examples of that.
And I suppose as well, had you finished college, you might have not done that internship. So, who knows what would have happened afterwards. So, but yeah. Okay, well, that's probably a nice little segue into chatting about your most recent score, which is currently out on Netflix, which is Monster, the Ed Gein Story. Under the Skin. I suppose, interestingly, this is quite classical in nature. If you sort of listen to Mr. Robot, there's a lot of electronic in that, but for the Monster Ed Gein Story, it feels quite classical. But how did that come about? What were the first meetings you had? And tell us a bit about how that came to be.
Well, I mean, I'll give just a little bit of a history that I've been working for Ryan Murphy since 2014, so 11 years. And, up until that point, most of my work, certainly anything that anyone had ever heard of, was as an additional composer. And then a producer in the Ryan Murphy world kind of plucked me from obscurity and brought me in to score season 4 of American Horror Story. And that just kind of kickstarted everything right from that moment. And that took me to Mr. Robot and multiple Ryan Murphy shows. And I've been very fortunate to be quite busy for the last decade plus.
And that producer that plucked you from obscurity, what did he see or what did he hear that he wanted in his next score?
Well, she,
very, God, how sexist of me, jeez.
Yeah, the behind the scenes story is that Cliff Martinez was hired to score a Ryan Murphy film. And I was working as an additional composer for him. And so this producer got involved with us in completing the score. And she came to Cliff's studio. We all worked together to get the music where she thought Ryan would be happy with it. And so there was a connection formed there. And the project was finished. Everyone was happy. We all went our separate ways. 6 months later, I got a phone call from her saying, "Hey, we're going in a different direction on American Horror Story this season. Would you be available to write a cue for us this afternoon?" And I'm like, I happen to be free. And so I wrote the cue. They played it for Ryan the next morning, and I was hired.
Was that an electronic?
It was electronic, but it had some organic type sounds in it. It was a real hybrid type thing, but it definitely sounded electronic. And so, it turns out that they had, they've been trying to find this sound they wanted for the season, and they hadn't been able to find it, and they were running out of time, and they were, trying different things. She's like, "Oh, I guess I liked working with Mac. Let me call him and see if he'll try." And I think they had reached out to other people as well. My piece of music was not the only thing Ryan heard that day, but I was the one that was picked. And then I was off and running, and frankly, life-changing. It was a life-changing phone call, and so that brings me 11 years later to Monster, and basically Ryan asking me to write music for this show that will do a few things. He's a visionary. He knows the big picture of what he's looking to achieve with his projects. And I think that's every aspect of how it's going to look and sound and the music. And so he said, this music needs to do two main things. And one is, it is at its heart, it's a horror show. And the music needs to scare people. It needs to be unsettling. It needs to be creepy. It needs to have the elements of horror. But it's also a drama about a man who is, he did all these horrible things, but he's a human, very broken, unwell human. And can the music help tell that side of the story? And maybe people might at times feel a little bit of compassion for him, even in the midst of all these terrible things that he did. And so that's what he asked. Very simple, very general, no specifics about style or, the only other thing was he did, I feel like this score is organic. This is not an electronic score. It shouldn't sound like it's from the 1950s. He didn't want it to be like a period sounding, but it should feel at home in a story about the 1950s. And that was it. And that was the direction.
So when you sat down to write the first idea, had you seen a script or had you seen any initial film?
I had seen the first episode, which was almost complete.
Right. And so what was that? What can you remember what cue it was that you wrote first?
My response to Ryan when he gave me his vision was that I would write two themes. I would write one theme for Ed and one theme for his mother. And that I was going to use the cello for Ed, and I was going to use the violin for his mother. And so that's what I sat down to write. Was I wrote those two themes, and I recorded them with real players, and I sent them in, and I got the thumbs up, and then we were off and running.
That was it. So those initial offerings hit the tone that Ryan was looking for, and that was the beginning. And that was the beginning.
And the rest of the score, I expanded the ensemble slightly, but it was still that, I used two cellists, a violinist, and a percussionist, and a woodwind player. And it's all organic. I think I used one synth pad in like 3 cues. That sounds almost vaguely organic itself, and the rest of it is all completely organic, all recorded. And 3 of those musicians also contributed as additional composers. And so they were helping me. They were collaborating with me on some of the music and playing. So it was very helpful.
Out of interest, those initial cues, so you're writing for cello and violin, are you mocking those up with virtual instruments, or are you sitting with a player from the start when you start writing?
I did mock them up. Yes, I did mock them up. But those mock-ups never left my team. They never went to Ryan or anybody. They just went to the players, and then the players did like a much better job of playing them.
It brings it to life, doesn't it, in a way that the virtual instruments just can't replicate. And something I noticed that I was interested in the idea of blurring the lines between sound design and music, because was it one of the cues? Was it fire? It almost sounds like there's creaking wood in there. It sounds like something's burning. And I was just wondering if that was a sort of conscious choice, or something that you do is sort of almost trying to build in that sense, sound design into the cues. I
mean, I wonder if that's if it just sort of subconsciously ended up in there. I mean, that particular cue is a giant cacophonous layers of percussion that just builds and builds, and then it's just so many layers of all these different instruments. It's a bit sloppy, which I think it adds to the frenetic nature of the scene. But yeah, it's interesting that you heard like the sound of fire in there.
Yeah, it just, you know, like the crackle when something's burning. There was that going on as well, and I was listening, thinking, is that actually sound of a fire burning? But it wasn't. It was, I think it. Well, I didn't think it was. I thought it was a part of the cue. But yeah, I was just interested because I always think that it is something really nice to do, is to blur those lines between the music and the sound design. But yeah, I didn't know whether that was a conscious thing or not. Well,
I think if you don't mind, the next interview I do, I'm going to tell them that I did do that consciously.
Absolutely. No, feel free. I'll confirm. It's like, no, he clearly stated that he did it very, very deliberately. And so in terms of, you've got these two themes, and then how do you sort of then start to build the world out for it? Because obviously there's scenes where there's it's Charlie Hunnam, isn't it, that plays Ed, and Laurie Metcalf. Because you mentioned before, like, that Ed is very broken because Laurie Metcalf plays the mother so well. She's just horrible, and you can see how he's a broken human being in the way that she treats him. But so you've got those two key themes. How do you go about then building out the world and creating the rest of the score?
I mean, it's just really, you know, one scene at a time, just doing a different version of a theme in another scene, evolving it over here, taking maybe just the accompaniment for the theme for another scene, and then sending that in to Ryan and his team, getting feedback from them, making changes to it, and it just kind of starts to evolve. And by the time we finished the first episode, now there's a world. It started with two themes, and now there's this world. Still not evolved to the place where it will once we're going to finish the series, but now there's something there, and then it just keeps, each episode it just keeps growing more as we evolve it.
So, would you say that the score for the final episode, because you mentioned before about the track just building and building and layers and growing, is the same true of the score for the whole series, that as you get towards the end, it's getting bigger and bigger?
Well, no, it was in that scene, because it was, you know, it was actually this fire. You know, I don't want to give it away if anyone hasn't seen it, but it just needed that the cacophony of all these layers of percussion, and so it built and built and built. But I wouldn't say that is the overall arc of what the music did throughout the series. I mean, it really did ebb and flow, because the storytelling ebbs and flows, and I'm just there to support that. So there were some big moments later on that the music got quite big, and then there was also very, very small, intimate moments, and I even got to, you know, the very last cue is what I call like the happy version of the Ed theme, where previously there had been two versions. There'd been the scary Ed theme, and there'd been the sad Ed theme. And now I put it into a major key and used piano, and it's kind of this, like, it's supposed to be a little bit uplifting, like Ed's, you know, had this sort of journey. I don't want to say like there's some redemption or anything after what he did, but he's there's been an arc that he's gone through, and the music is reflecting like something a little more positive, and it's really still his theme, but done in a way that's slightly uplifting.
Yeah, well, I have to say the score does an incredible job of making, well, I the series as a whole, but obviously you're underpinning on the visuals, but it does feel very uncomfortable. And to give some context, I had to watch Midsummer in 3 sittings because I felt so uneasy. But I think the same is true of this. It's pretty dark subject matter, but as I think the music underpins that really nicely as well. And so that fear and that horror that you had initial discussions with Ryan about is definitely there. How does your writing process differ? So for something like this, which is where there's no electronic, coming from a background where you focused for so long on electronic music, and for something like Mr. Robot, which was pretty electronic heavy, does your creative process change at all, given that you're not working with synths?
It changes partially. There are some cues where I am writing the cue, using the technology, and then I will give it to the players to play. I'll give it to myself. Like I'll write my piano part with the computer, but then I'll sit down at the real piano and record it. And so, whereas with electronic music, you write it with the electronics and there it is, it's done. But then there are other cues where they've been created by taking bits of audio that's already been recorded for previous cues and now manipulating it and turning it into a new cue. And so in that case, it is very similar to electronic music because I'm using the technology to craft something out of existing pieces that I've already written and recorded, but now I'm doing something different with them. And that could include pitching them down, putting some new effect on them, editing them in a certain way, combining them in different ways. And so it's very similar to doing electronic music at that point.
And if I may nerd out a little bit on sort of plugins or tech, are there any particular programs that you sort of go to for when you want to start manipulating audio?
I mean, my main program is Logic, and so I tend to do everything there. It's quite powerful. I can do almost everything I want, and I can manipulate the audio like right there on a track and do lots of things with it. Other times, if I feel like I need to, I'll put it in a sampler like Contact or the Logic built-in sampler, and then manipulate it there, play it like an instrument. But yeah, that's it's such a crazy powerful program. I can do so much with it.
And how much of your synth work is analog synth versus soft synth?
It's in general, it's been mostly soft synths. I have a nice collection now of analog synths, and I've been saying this for years, and I still haven't reached this point where incorporating the hardware synths into my workflow is efficient, because it takes longer. It's so quick to open up a plugin, put it in your part, and you're done. With the analog synth, even if you've already had it, if you've connected it and all you have to do is like open up a channel and play it, you've now still got to tweak your sound. Maybe you have to store your sound, then you need to record the audio. And I mean, it just, when you're working fast and the deadlines are tight, it's harder to fit it in there. But I will mention one project that I did also for Ryan a handful of years ago called Pose. It was a television show that ran for 3 seasons. And the story starts in the mid 80s in New York. And they said they wanted an 80s synth score. And so I got this idea that I was going to, at that time, I think I had like 7 synths or something like that. And I said, I'm going to do this score only with the hardware. I will use the computer generated sounds for drums and piano, but everything else is going to be the hardware. And this is my ensemble, these 7 synths, and it was limiting, but also really freeing at the same time. And I think it gave it this character because it was all real hardware. It has a little bit different sound to it, and instead of an infinite number of sounds that you have at your fingertips with the computer, I had these 7 synthesizers, and it was I really enjoyed that.
It's interesting. There's a theme. That is a theme that's come up several times, is the idea that by restricting yourself, you actually free yourself, because you don't have to. There's the paradox of choice is that when you have so much choice, you can then spend far too long trying lots of different things, whereas if you've got a limitation. And I suppose that if you think back to before computers provided the power that they do, when you went into a studio, producers were doing that. They were committing to a particular sound. They had to dial in the guitar amp and get it as they wanted it, because you couldn't then change the amp simulator or what have you. So, there's definitely something freeing to be said for limiting yourself.
I should try it again with the right project, something like that, like really limit it.
So you felt the difference in that score in using those 7 synths?
I think so. I think it, there was definitely a very cohesive sound, because you heard a lot of the different sounds repeating throughout the score. And I think there is, it's subtle and a lot of people can't hear it, but there is a different sound in the hardware. I mean, so many of these hardware synths have virtual emulations, and I have done some comparing, to try to see. And I mean, they sound so close, but there's something about the hardware. It's like a little less perfect. And so I feel like it had this thing to it, which I enjoyed. I liked doing that. I mean, in a certain sense, you could say that the Monster score had similar limitations, because I'd picked my palette. I'm going to use cello, violin, woodwinds, and percussion, and that's it. And it's not just whatever sound I can come up with from my infinite library of plugins and sounds. It was like that's it. And so it made the choices were really mostly musical rather than sound. I established the sound right away.
Although, did you kind of rely on the musicians or get them to create interesting different sounds rather than just sort of traditionally bowing it to doing anything different with the instruments? For
sure. And I think you can hear that in the score. There's all types of extended techniques and interesting uses of the instrument that have been part of the, let's call it the orchestral vocabulary in film and television music for quite a while, of using these techniques, creating unusual sounds. They're definitely popular in horror and other genres. They're quite good at creating tension and uneasy feelings.
Are there any particular of those techniques in Monster that you are particularly pleased with?
Well, I mean, there's a technique that it's not really. I mean, no, it combines a player technique with a technological approach. And so you'll hear in a lot of the cues, there's this, a simple description might be, it's like an organic drone sound. And so one of the cellists played these, kind of just sustained notes that were uneven, and they had like lots of sort of little changes in them and ripples and irregularities. And they gave me this folder of tracks that they'd recorded. There was maybe 15 of them. They're like, maybe some of these could be useful. And I put them all in Logic, and individually they all did sound really interesting. It's like a cello, and it would be sort of, doing things like that. And so I had 15 of these tracks, and I just hit play, and I played them all together, and it sounded amazing. And so I then they weren't necessarily cooperating in pitch exactly what I wanted, so I retuned a few of them, and now I looped them. And they're different lengths, so they're looping at different times. So it's not just this one loop happening, it's constantly shifting. And now those 15 tracks become this one sound, and I would put a filter on it and like some reverb. And now I have this organic drone, and it got several uses in the score. One, sort of a mid-range drone, and I would filter it up and down and do different things. And then I took all of the tracks and I pitched them down like an octave and some 2 octaves. And now it became this organic bass drone that had lots of fluctuation in it. And it was a very useful tool for the score.
I love that you've mentioned that, because that I absolutely heard that, and there was a moment where I was listening to it thinking, has he layered in some synths there to get that sound? But then as I was listening close, I was like, no, it sounds like double basses, but not quite. But obviously it sounds like it was cellos pitched down and layered up, and I did, it popped. I heard it and I was like, oh, that's really, really interesting.
But when I put them in the Logic just so I could go through easily and like, let's hear this one, let's hear that one, and then when I just played them all at once, I was like, I never ended up using any of them separately. It was just like all 15 of them playing together, looping at different times, and it was it was exciting. It was one of those moments where I was just like, yes, here.
Yeah, those happy accidents where you just sort of lightning, and you're like, okay, yes, great. I can't remember who. I think it was talking to Jed Kurzel about something, and he'd been messing around with the guitar and some reverbs and some delays. And anyway, he sort of put the guitar down and went to lunch. And when he came back, there's obviously some resonance on the guitar had been going through the reverb and the delays, and they were making this incredible noise. And he's like, right, I've got to capture this immediately, because he's no idea how he created it, but it then ended up forming, I can't remember which score it was for, but it formed the sort of the foundation for some of the cues. And it's just those happy accidents are so lovely. And I love what you're talking about as well with the imperfection, because I think this is a drum I've been banging for a long time, and I think I'm a huge proponent of. I mean, I say this when I'm primarily in the box, but about putting things through hardware, because I agree. I think something happens when you put sound through circuitry, and it's the imperfections. And I think on a fundamental level, we are drawn to those imperfections, and I think that's what. We love, the saturation, distortion. I mean, all the UAD plugins are basically emulating 60s and 70s gear, and what's it doing? It's adding saturation, it's adding distortion. Getting a taste. I always think that as creatives, we're shaped largely by a lot of the media that we consume, whether it's music, TV, film. Are there some seminal pieces of music, whether it's albums or individual tracks or artists, that stick out in your mind from when you were younger that you listened to, that you think have gone a long way into shaping you and your mindset, creative mindset today?
I don't know if I have like any like real specific. I mean, I've listened to so much music, and I go through phases of listening to things, and what can happen with me? I will come up with something concrete as an example, but I'll pull out something that I haven't listened to in a while, like many years, that I used to listen to a lot. And all of a sudden I'll start hearing in it, like I'm hearing, oh, this really influenced me. Like I've taken the sensibility and I use this in how I produce things. and do things, you know? So gosh, how was that recently happening? And this, yeah, obviously I wasn't listening to this as a child, but like I'm a huge Radiohead fan. And I just sort of went through, I listened to almost all their albums a couple of weeks ago. And I hadn't listened in a little while. And I just, they've really developed this approach of being unusual harmonic choices, rhythmic choices, and interesting kind of what I would call, maybe it's intentional, or they just like the way it's like sloppy production, you know, things sounding like a bit out of time and just off kilter and strange and weird endings. And I realized, wow, I do that quite a lot. Like I like things being imperfect, and if sometimes if they're not, I'll intentionally like make them imperfect to just give this strangeness to it.
Did you growing up listen to a lot of electronic music, given that you went into working with electronic music?
I mean, my early years were not. You know, I mean, I listened to whatever my dad had laying around, you know, but there was one album that was electronic, and it's a seminal electronic record, Switched on Bach by Walter Carlos, who became Wendy Carlos, a very early trans woman, way before, like I think he transitioned in the early 80s or something, and continued to create music for film. And, you know, I can't remember if I must have been pre-transition, but like Walter did the music for Clockwork Orange, a Stanley Kubrick film, and Switched on Bach. If you haven't heard it, I highly recommend digging it out. It's these Bach pieces all played on, you know, using a Moog modular synthesizer. And it's beautiful. It's really great. I mean, it's Bach's notes. It's, you know, but just done with these sounds that never had been used before for that type of music. And so I think that probably had quite a bit of influence on me. And it was years later before I had my own synthesizer or was really listening to electronic music, but that was something early. And
can you remember any of those records that you mentioned that your dad was listening to that stick out in your mind?
Gosh, it's like it was like that first Chicago album, Chicago Transit Authority, which was a very different band from where they ended up. Neil Diamond, Jesus Christ Superstar musical.
Oh, wow. Okay. Eclectic.
Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Those are some of the early things I can remember listening to.
And what about, did you watch a lot of TV and film as a kid?
Yeah.
What were some of the standout things that you were a fan of?
Gosh. You know, one of the first films that really had a big impact that I remember going to the theater. I remember it being a huge event was Jaws. And I mean, I think they credit Jaws as being the first blockbuster ever. And it was quite something. You know, I saw the original Star Wars in the theater. That had quite an impact.
Both, of course, John Williams scores.
Both, yes. And
do they stick out in your mind, Jaws and Star Wars? The scores, do you remember, maybe not at the time, but retrospectively been struck by the...
They didn't at the time. They really didn't. I wasn't paying attention. I was not paying attention to the scores. And gosh, did he also score the Poseidon Adventure? I think you did. And that was maybe even before those. I went to see the Poseidon Adventure probably too young. It's not a great kids movie. But I remember it had quite an effect of seeing that. Yeah. So, gosh, all these early films, John Williams, I think he scored some Twilight Zone stuff too. Like he had early early television. I definitely watched some Twilight Zone.
I mean, he was doing a lot in the 80s, wasn't he? So much of Hollywood score was John Williams. Jaws was that 79?
No, that's like 72 or something.
Is it 72? Wow, okay. So that must have been one of his earlier scores.
No, maybe it's a little later, 75 or something. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, it was in the 70s. And I wasn't paying attention to the scores at all. No, I wasn't noticing them. They were having an effect on me emotionally, for sure. And I'm going to venture to say, which puts all of our composer egos in check, is that a lot of people that watch film and television don't notice the scores. Even today, adults, they would notice if it weren't there, but they're just they're not paying attention to that. They're just watching the story, and there's a sad saying, maybe you've heard, where the composers, when we're doing our job, no one notices us. So
the unsung heroes behind the scenes,
and it's fine. It's all good. I mean, I can't help but notice now, I am able to get lost in a show or a film, and I'm not constantly like listening to the score, but my brain is often checking in and going, oh, that's great. Oh, I love that. That sound is or that's what.
That's crap.
Why did they do that?
Yeah.
And then because I know a lot about the process, and I think whoever this composer is, I'm like, he's so good. Why would he have done that? But I'm like, oh, because they probably told him to do it.
I was going to say, I have a theory whenever I hear sort of like a weird incongruous cue. I think, why did they do that? And I think there's probably like 5 execs all wanted to have their say, so they ended up sort of, that was it. So
that's possibly what happened. I mean, there's a lot of cooks in these kitchens.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that speaks to the fact that we are generally visually led. It's our principal sense. But I think also, like, I don't know about you, but when I'm watching something, I don't notice the edit, but an editor would. An editor will notice the cuts and they'll notice the pacing and things like that because they work with that on a daily basis. So
I think it's possible that by not knowing anything about all of the aspects of it, it's maybe a more all-consuming experience because you're not thinking about any of it. And I've learned a fair amount about a lot of aspects of filmmaking. And so I will see it now. I will notice the camera work. I'll notice the lighting. I've been on sets. I've been on a lot of sets. And so I'll look at something and at first I'm not thinking that it's a set. And then I'm like, it's a set. And like, I see the window in the background and it looks like you're seeing the street, but you're not. You're seeing what's been made to look like the street outside the window of the apartment. And so my brain will go there. And I mean, I'm still enjoying watching, but yeah, it's a little different that I notice all these aspects of it.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, actually, because something I thought of was when you received the edit of Monster, the first episode, given that, did it have a temp score, or and I suppose what I'm asking, did it have instill the same level of fear when you're watching it as the composer with a view to scoring it versus the end product? How much does the fear factor come from the music and that final cut?
I mean, it's very common for things to have temp score, for sure. And what I hope is that the temp score isn't getting the job done for them, because then it's challenging when they're like, this piece of music works so perfectly, so now you have to write something that is going to work just as perfectly. It's better when the music, say, is kind of in the direction, but like, let's say in this case, it's really not scary enough. It's like, there's some instrumentation that works and maybe the tempo works, but it's really not it really needs to be much more scary. It needs to be like, that's good temp for me.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, that first episode that you watched, 10 being very scary, where do you think it lies?
I mean, it varied,
Okay.
It varied on the different cues that they had in there. There were, there were some cues that were maybe up there, that were maybe like working as a 7 or 8, and then there was plenty that were a 2 or a 3 that they had just put in there and they weren't happy with it. So yeah, it's the real problem, and it didn't happen on Monster, but the real problem is when it's like a 9 or a 10. getting
all the way through.
Getting the producers to change their mind on it, and it's I think any composer is going to tell you there's yes, maybe that temp cue it's a 9 or a 10, but it's not the only cue that can be a 9 or a 10. There's plenty of ways to get to achieve that, but people get really used to it. They get very stuck on it, and it can be hard to dislodge that for them.
Well, I suppose it's probably a good time to start wrapping things up. But before we do, got the quick fire questions. First one is what's your favorite cookie?
That's just sort of a right turn out of.
Yeah, isn't it just? We've gone really deep.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna go with the chocolate chip.
Chocolate chip. That's I think third person in a row who's gone with the chocolate chip cookie. Is there a specific brand, or you like any chocolate chip cookie?
No, I mean I like them somewhat soft, the homemade best, or at a restaurant where they make them themselves, so it's not like store bought. But
yeah,
yeah.
So chocolate chip cookie, but high end.
Yeah.
Excellent. How do you let off steam?
How do I let off steam? I mean, I do like to skate.
Really?
Like either sort of rollerblades, inline skating outside, or in recent years I've done more roller rink stuff too, with like old school skates.
Oh wow,
it's good fun.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, Jeff Russo. I don't think he skates to let off steam, but he used to be a very keen skater. And Aaron May, who part of the composer duo that scored Adolescence, he's a very keen inline skater, and I think goes to skate parks and does half pipes and all of it. So it's quite interesting. That's the other third skater that we've had on the show. What's obviously the table tennis we've covered, but what's a little known fact about you?
A little known fact. Let's see. I mean, my full name is it's not that known, I mean, everyone knows me as Mac Quayle, but it's short for Frederick McDonald Quayle Jr.
Frederick McDonald,
which is very formal sounding.
Wow. And so you've got the silent first name.
The silent first name, and Mac is short for McDonald.
McDonald, wow.
And this is because my father was Frederick McDonald Quayle. and they called him Fred. So they chose that they would call me Mac, but I would have the junior.
Wow, there's a distinction.
It's strange even to me because I just don't think of myself as that. Like that's like this weird name that I put on some business documents, but it's like an alter ego in a way.
Yeah. So do you sign things Mac Quayle or do you?
I do sign some things Mac Quayle, but then there's other things. You know, my tax returns need to be my full legal name.
Yeah. Okay. Great. What scares you?
I mean, do you just mean in life or like in media or?
No, in life. Just what do you fear?
I mean, I'm a father. You know, I have two kids, 9 and 11, and that brings a whole suite of fears about like something happening to your kids. Like that's the. I mean, I'm not like walking around in terror about like something might happen at any moment, but that's probably the scariest thing to me is something happening to them, and it's affected my watching things. You know, like it didn't used to. I could watch things, and I mean, I didn't enjoy things where bad stuff happens to kids in film or whatever, but it didn't like particularly bother me. Now, like that's the line. I don't want to, like, I don't like to watch those kind of things happen, or you know, just anything like really bad with kids. You mentioned adolescence, like that was a tough watch.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
So
it's because it's so gritty and real as well. But yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, and then finally, Mac, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Follow your instinct. Don't be afraid to disregard others insisting that you do things a certain way. You know, follow your instinct, trust it, and let the path unfold. That's
a lovely sentiment on which to end. Well, Mac, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's been a genuine pleasure. Obviously your music is all over the internet, Spotify. I always mention Spotify because that's what I use, but obviously it's presumably it's on Apple as well. What about a website, social media? Where can people find you?
I am yes, my music is on all the sites everywhere.
Napster.
It's on there. Maybe, yeah, I wonder. Napster,
MySpace,
and I'm on Instagram. That's the only one I'm really active on right now. I've kind of, yeah.
One's enough.
Yeah, and I got kicked off of Facebook.
Oh, really?
Which is not. It's not. You know, I mean, it's a little bit passé anyway. But it's a lot of the music community is very active on there. You know, and I got kicked off for some unknown reason, and my one appeal was shot down, and there's no further recourse for me to go back onto Facebook. So okay, so
you can't argue with the algorithm.
Yeah, I guess I'm on Instagram. Is where I'm at.
But it's funny because Instagram and Facebook are both owned by Meta, so you'd think that they would communicate. And it's like if you're not fit for one, but luckily,
and it still says if I go into some settings, my Meta accounts, it still says I have the Facebook account, but like I can't get on there. It says I violated some community standards that it was not specific about.
Wow.
And yeah, I didn't. So yeah, I got caught up in some algorithmic sweep that was not correct.
Well, yeah, that happened to me with Instagram. I got mine deleted permanently for no reason at all. But as you say, you can't argue with an algorithm, and there's no one to speak to. But yeah, well, Mac, thank you so much again. Good luck with is dark. What's the Apple? Dark matter. Season 2.
Yes.
Is that are you working? You're working on that at the moment.
I'm working on that. That's going to be sometime later next year. There's a couple others I could just quickly plug as we close. But tonight, there's 2 shows are premiering also in the Ryan Murphy universe. 911. 911 is premiering season 9. And they have started a new one in that universe, 911 Nashville, and that premieres season 1 tonight. So we're excited about that. And then there is a mini-series that I finished for Netflix called His and Hers. It's a crime, mystery, murder, crime thriller. Quite fun. I'm waiting on a release date there. And the last thing is I'm working on a new Ryan Murphy show called The Beauty, which is a sci-fi action thriller with some horror in it.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So that's so look out for those.
So you're busy. Keep him busy. Excellent.
Busy.
Yeah, we'll definitely look out for those. I will link to your Instagram and website, etc., in the show notes. But yeah, Mac, thanks so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larpmusic.com. Larpmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larpmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.